What's up, guys? Dr. Dani LaMartina here with Team Troponin. I'm getting ready for the Olympia. I'm 6 weeks out right now. I'm going to take you through one of my leg days. Hope you enjoy the footage, but as always, if you have any questions, comments, I want to know what questions you have about what I do. I'm going to try and drop a little bit of knowledge to see if we can help you get the results that you want. But any questions, comments, likes, subscribes, we'll take all of them. So thanks for following along. I do a little PT at home to get going, but I tend to find that for me, my quads are weak point. I've had a couple foot surgeries. So for a lot of my closed chain movements, meaning like pressing or squatting movements, anything where my foot is on the ground, I'm more limited by my foot mobility. A lot of times our ability to get into a deep squat position is a coupling motion between our hip and our knee and our tibia and our foot. So if one of those is limited, you tend to see some restrictions from range of motion. People always villainize either the hips or the feet. For me, it's both. So I'm going to talk through some of my strategies today too. But first thing I'm going to do is just try and get my hip to open up a little bit. Left more than right is a little bit of a struggle today. So I'm going to use the same mobilization for different ways on different legs, different purposes. So on the left side here, I'm just looking to get a little bit of hip flexion and a little bit of hip rotation. I'm trying to take my pelvis, if I have two headlights on it, and I'm turning my headlights to the left as best I can to try and get this posterior hip to open up. It is really tight today. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I did a little bit at home, but I feel like I already tightened up in the car on the way here. We've got about a 30-minute drive, so I'm trying to visualize that ball from the ball and socket being pulled in the same line as the band. So I can change the angle if I want to, depending on where I'm feeling the restriction. And there's really no right or wrong. I think a lot of times people want to assume there's one way to do a stretch or one way to do a mobilization, but finding a way to own that position for your body rather than doing it just like someone else is always going to be the best option for you. And then on the right side, I'm actually going to use this more as like a foot mobilization, where I'm going to grab my foot here and just try to get my the ball of the foot on the floor a little bit more as I drive my right knee forward. So again, my headlights on my hip bones are turning to the left. For me, that's the pattern I tend to fall into, so I just try to find ways to work into the opposite with different sides. Every human body is asymmetrical. People get really hung up on asymmetries, but we're not put together symmetrically. So learning how to manage them and work within them is always going to be your best bet rather than trying to fix them. Sometimes you got to work with what you got. Don't get me wrong, like you want to correct what you can, but when it comes to training, get in and train. So you'll see I make a couple adjustments today, but nothing really wild. Setup on something like hamstring curls is really important. I think especially with the top set, down set style that's gotten really popular, people just start moving from point A to point B. But if you're a smaller person or if you have a harder time connecting with a muscle group like hamstrings for me, little tweaks in your setup are going to go a long way. Something like a hamstring curl, you really want to make sure you're locked in, which might mean using a couple extra pieces that aren't part of the actual machine. And then for me, my cue that I think about is keeping my legs turned in just a little bit so that my pelvis is in a good position because it likes to splay forward, which again is coupled with hip external rotation. So I think about turning in just to keep my legs neutral. And then the other thing I think about is pulling my heels to the back of my shoe. That's really going to help connect the hamstrings. So I like starting, Dave and I both like starting our leg days with hamstrings. There's a lot of science that goes behind it. I mean, some of it is just it feels good. You get some blood in the area. Things feel a little bit more pumped, more stable. But there's also some science about the post-activation potentiation, meaning once you get a muscle working in a set, it's a lot easier to kind of get that muscle working with better synchronicity in some of your heavier movements. So it primes the nervous system a little bit. And if you're anyone who's been lifting for a long time, you have any aches and pains, one of the best things you can do is start to just flood the area with blood. Kind of get that area, I don't want to say like woken up, but for lack of a better word, get the brain and that muscle talking because that's going to help stabilize. Remember, training is about putting tension in the muscle and making sure you're allocating it in the muscle, not letting it go to joints, not letting it go to tendons or ligaments, or just like cranking on a soft tissue passive structure. So keep it as active as you can. I have a really hard time connecting with my quads. So I've got a couple strategies that I'm going to use as I'm doing the leg extension in a minute too, that I'll talk about. But what I was just doing there is trying to drive a little bit of length on the muscle. I have a long history of powerlifting, and I have a lot of like very dense tissue that's a little bit fibrotic, but I'm trying to get it to open up and really just encourage a little bit of expansion. So one other thing I've been doing at home is just trying to find those like silicone plastic cups you can get on Amazon and trying to create some negative pressure on the area. A lot of people like to use a positive pressure, meaning pushing on. But if you're trying to create space, use what you can to create space, right? And think about what you're actually doing. So for me, I'm just trying to get some length on there. I will use anything I can to improve connection to my quads because I have such a hard time with them. Which is usually the opposite. People usually have a hard time connecting with glutes more than quad. I think for me, because of my surgical history and I have a hard time driving my knees forward because I don't have the foot motion for it to come here. Like, it's not my ankle that's restricted. It's more my foot and or heel too, being able to let the heel turn out so that the forefoot, the front of the foot can kind of turn in. So again, I'm thinking heels to the back of the shoes, keeping my thigh bones really, really straight. People like to turn them out. Keep them straight. One thing I'll have clients do occasionally, if they're doing it lying, is put something between their knees so they're getting their adductors a little engaged as well. Our major adductor muscle, adductor magnus, has a portion that functions like a hamstring. So if I'm taking a pyramid up, I like using pyramids to get blood flow. And what I mean by that pyramid is taking a set of 15 to 20 and then 12 to 15 and then maybe a top set of 10 to 12. Where your first sets, the higher rep sets, aren't necessarily super, super hard. They should be kind of pumpy, driving connection to the area without necessarily overly fatiguing you for your top sets. I slept an hour and a half for the last 3 nights. And I was definitely just busting out to some Mariah Carey on the way here and kind of feeling like I need a little pick-me-up right now. So we're just going to dig deep and make it happen today. Ah! Oh man, it's gonna be a day when I'm already making myself cry in the first movement. I'm coming off of 3 low days in a row. My low days right now are no added fats and only vegetables. So I'm basically eating protein. I'm not sleeping and doing double stair sessions every day and still managing all the inflammation from the autoimmune stuff and getting steps and trying to work and pose and mobility. My brain is tired. We got 6 weeks, so we dig. Whew. So training adductors, similar to training hamstrings, you want to think about where you're actually putting the tension. A lot of times on these machine adductions, people end up feeling like the tendon right up high rather than the muscle belly. So there are a couple things you can do to fix that. First one that I always look at with people is not your forward lean, because that's coming from my spine, but looking at what position my pelvis is in, and then looking at my foot placement. So if I go here, I'm right in my short adductors. This is the tendon that I tore off my pelvis. So I want to drive a little resilience here. That tissue needs to strengthen. But if I really want to hit the muscle belly, I'm actually going to start at a position that's a little bit narrower and lets me get my pelvis under me a little bit. Realign my feet and actually think about pulling my toes up a little bit, almost like I'm pulling into me rather than just squeezing. So again, starting wider isn't always better because it's going to put your pelvis in a position that's going to bias which portion of the adductors you're hitting. Don't get me wrong, you want to have gnarly hip flexors and have good detail here, but if you're really looking to add meat to your legs, you want to get the muscle belly, not just the tendons up top. So first thing I would do, start a little narrower, get your pelvis in a position to where you can actually say, okay, where that muscle attaches all along the inside of my pelvis, that's not an awkward shot or anything, right along the inside of my pelvis to actually contract, means you need to put it in a position where it can do so. So I'm going to do one more set while I'm waiting for stuff in between. One of the biggest things I look at with prep and training is trying to be efficient. You've only got so much energy. And for me, even just being in the gym takes energy to show up. So the longer I'm here, just being here, I feel my mental commitment kind of diminish. So I need to be in it, get on it, stay in it, and be really, really focused. I don't have the pad with me this time. And you're gonna see how much my pelvis changes position. I have to really fight to maintain it. But again, trying to be efficient. I feel like I got great work in my first set. So this is really just to drive continued connection and blood flow. Similar to hamstrings, I tend to find that if you actually do these right, and you're in a position where you're contracting the muscle you're trying to contract and not just like, you know, staying on the short tendons, use a lot less weight. So if I'm not real picky with myself, I'll use the stack and then some and add a plate on top, not a full plate, but some change on top. But being really connected here today, I'm using roughly half. One other strategy that I've been using is alternating volume weeks with intensification weeks. Last week I did a top set with the rest pause here. This week I'm doing just a little bit more volume. I have to be very careful with how much stress I put on the tissue, just given where I have injury histories and some of the inflammation issues that I have going on. So being really smart and targeted about when I'm using intensification techniques versus when I'm driving more volume, both of those stimulus are a little bit different and they're gonna drive different changes. Some of the higher volume work has increased my work capacity, how long those muscles can stay engaged under load, which is going to carry over to pressing. More of that top end strength is the ability to strain through a heavy rep and kind of trust that tissue. So different purposes. I like to alternate both, especially in prep, because it becomes easier to come in and hit the session. If you're constantly beating yourself up with a rest pause set every week, you know that there's a point where you're like, man, I do not know how I'm going to add another rep. So finding a way to kind of stretch that out by alternating an A week and a B week is a great way to kind of troubleshoot that. I'm going to be doing some leg extensions next. I've started doing them earlier in my session just to help drive a little bit better connection and output. I'll talk you through some of the strategies that I'm using to improve connection there. On my front relax, my front double, pretty much any of my front poses, my right quad looks much smaller than my left. Some of it is actual muscle size, some of it is just because my pelvis sits so far back on my right side that it creates a rotation through the thigh bone that makes it hard for the sweep to come out. So my quads need to be bigger anyway, but it's more apparent just based on my pelvis position. So actually you probably see it here. This quad looks a lot smaller, probably. I'm not really flexing right now. But if I change my pelvis, you can see that sweep starts to come out a lot more. So just something to kind of note that if you're someone who sees a lot of asymmetries in yourself, it might not always be due to muscular size. Some of it is actually due to orientation or position of the muscle based on what it attaches to and what those attachments are doing in terms of their position. So if this is back, it's gonna put this quad in a different position than if this is forward. I think what I might do today is actually band this to overload top end a little bit. Probably what I'll do in between sets here is you'll see me hit some loaded stretching and then isometrics alternating every other warm-up set just to continue to drive connection. Again, for me, I have a really hard time connecting with my quads, so anything I can do to increase that proprioception, whether it's via contraction and something like an isometric, meaning just like squeezing the muscle, really trying to like get that working, tapping it. There's a portion of our brain that changes as we get better at feeling and connecting with a muscle. So for me, being able to touch that and feel that increases the, again, like activation, for lack of a better word, in that portion of our brain cortex that this muscle is represented by. So anything you can do to kind of stimulate that activity can be really, really helpful. I think if I remember correctly, what a lot of the studies are showing is a 6-second isometric is kind of the sweet spot to really improve that connection. I'm not holding a full 6 seconds. I'm practicing contracting the muscle and letting it go. Some of it is also just to drive blood into the muscle when it's in its fully shortened position. But You'll see me hop between the isometrics and a little bit of a loaded stretch in between sets here today. I wanted to do some occlusion work today before I really roll into my heavy pressing, but that means I'd have to be able to time my rest periods, and if I'm working in with someone, it can be tough to do that. So I'm just gonna pivot a little bit and roll with it. I'll probably hit some occlusion work at the end. Not a ton of resistance here. I'm just trying to lengthen the tissue without fatiguing it. Given I'm pretty under recovered right now, I'm trying to be smart about doing what I need to do to get better without digging the hole deeper. As much as we want to say there's no excuses, there are no excuses. You got to work hard, but there's also no excuse to be negligent if you know better. 6 weeks is a long time and also not a long time. So I'm debating if I want to do what I've been doing, which is a top set with a double drop set and some partials, or if I want to hit my occlusion work now rather than later. The benefit to occlusion work is you can get a really, really great stimulus without a lot of weight. So if you're a little bit under recovered or you don't feel like you can handle the heavier weight, that's something to consider. I'm shaking just sitting here, or just standing here rather, which is one of my big key performance indicators, and I'm pretty fatigued. And I think the deeper you get into a prep, the more you know yourself as an athlete, the more important it becomes to know those KPIs or key performance indicators in terms of if it's a green light, yellow light, or red light kind of day. Today is a yellow light for me. So thank you, Christian. We'll see, I'm gonna take another couple warm-up sets and then decide if I wanna do the occlusion work with timed rest periods or if I wanna do the double drop set. So this is one of the most underrated pieces of equipment that I keep in my gym bag. It helps keep me really stable, which if you're a smaller human and you have a hard time getting machines to fit you or getting anchored in, or if you're just tired and your grip is kind of giving out and you can't lock in, something like a seatbelt can help kind of get you braced back into the machine appropriately. They make all this new equipment for big people, and it's so frustrating as someone who's small. I'm 5'2" and I'm narrow. I'm a petite build, and so when I look at someone like Dave train, it's almost like irritating because everything just fits him perfectly. And I'm sitting here like, but I'm too little. So I have to find ways to basically make it work. One other thing that I say people do a lot with leg extensions is it's a simple movement, but there are a lot of ways to not set up correctly. You want to make sure that you actually have the pad underneath the fulcrum of your knee and that you're sitting back far enough that you can get a stretch in the quads. There's actually a demand for hip rotation at the ball and socket kind of gliding level that, like when I watch Dave and Christian train, Dave's cues don't work for Christian because Dave's hip rotation and what he has access to at that ball and socket level is different than what Christian has. And so it's really, really important that you think about getting your pelvis set so that as you extend your leg, and you're someone who, you can probably intuitively feel this too, where you know if you sit your hips back in the machine, it's either gonna feel like you can get quads working or it's gonna feel like you need to make an adjustment. And basically that's a function of what your pelvis position is doing, forward or backwards, and a little bit of out flare and in flare, because the pelvis tipping forwards, backwards, or flaring one direction is gonna change how much rotational ability there is just based on the position of the socket for the ball and socket. So TLDR, set up in a way that actually lets you feel your quads, not just because you see someone set up a certain way. Of course, today we're filming legs. I haven't shaved or anything. I'm so gross right now. Just exhausted. That's one of those things that I think people don't talk about enough in prep is like trying to stay like pretty as a girl when you're exhausted, and even just like showering feels like hard work. Like all the extra stuff like putting on your makeup and doing your hair, like there's all these extra steps that you just don't have to go through. Just to demonstrate that point I was talking about with hip rotation, a lot of people turn this way if they're trying to hit a different portion of their quad. That's turning the ball in the socket, which yes, will bias different parts of the quad. But if I turn my headlights on my hip bones from straight to 2 o'clock, that's essentially doing the same thing as turning my femur out. So if you're someone who lives with a little bit of an asymmetry, just something to kind of keep in mind. One of the coolest things about having moved to Texas is just the people that we're around on a daily basis. when I was prepping for Chicago. Steve Kuko was right behind me, and there were a lot of days where him and Greg, the gym owner here, really kind of carried me through my prep. It was just, coming in and the silent fist bump, and there was a day where I walked in and Steve just looked at me and goes, "You're winning this. Let's go, champion." And like, that was probably 3 weeks out, and I was like, you know what? If he says I can do it, why not? So it's really cool, the people that you're around and how much they have the ability to impact you for the positive if you lean into it, right? So we talk a lot about tuning out the negative voices, but there's also a lot of power in leaning into the positive ones. And I feel very, very blessed that we get to be here with that right now. One other thing I've really been trying to work on is moving with my quads and really controlling the reversal from the eccentric to the concentric here. It's humbled me. I've had to pull weight back a bit. And it's another point that I see with a lot of my coaching clients, that people take their isolations way too heavy. If it's an isolation movement, keep the goal the goal. What I'm doing here is trying to anticipate my drop set and set up so that I can just have Dave come and strip a plate. So looks a little funky, but planning ahead makes it a lot easier on you and the other person.
Come on.
Hi.
Good. Pull that bottom. Perfect. Looks good. Yep.
Hey.
At least one more. Yep. Come on. Good. Good. You can stay in this. Six. Come on. 2 more. 7. Yes. Yes. 5. 6. Yep. Here we go. Yep. Good.
I am so tired. I need some sleep. Was that good enough? I feel like mentally I bitched out there.
Okay. You could have stopped the warm-up spot.
I think during prep for Chicago, I would have cut that a lot shorter. So I'm really proud of, man, I am really trying to dig deep. It's been a really, really tough week. On these back offs, I'm gonna pull the weight back, and you're gonna notice that I'm not locking out all the way. I'm doing everything I can to basically put tension in my quads and trying to make lightweight feel heavy. I think up to like 2 weeks out, you gotta just embrace that you're gonna feel bad and keep digging. You have to absolutely show up and want it. So many people think that good enough is good enough, and the reality is, unless you're a phenom, it's not. I think there's a trend to keep things a little bit more low key, and the reality is you have to fight a little bit deeper and dig a little bit deeper. So when I ask Dave, as I'm like sitting here in tears during sets, did I bitch out? It's good for me to hear from him that that's not a concern right now. I needed to hear that. So this is another movement. I ran with the squat press for most of my off season, and when you build strength in a pattern, after a while it becomes harder and harder to progress, and you almost get that like almost PTSD-like anxiety that pops up when you've been milking a movement for a super long time. So one way that I've been modifying that during prep to basically, again, make lighter weight feel hard and just break up the pressure of a really, really heavy top set is by taking, kind of like I did with the hamstring curls earlier, taking pyramids, sets of 12 to 15, where the last set ends up being a drop set or a rest pause or some intensification variation. But since you're coming into it pre-fatigued, the top set's not going to be as heavy as it would in other sessions if you're doing this a little bit fresher and taking it as a true top set. So if I were taking this as just a true top set, I think my working weight for most of the off season was 8 to 8 1/4. You know, I'd take something like 2 plates, 4 plates, 5 1/4, 6 1/4, 7, all of those maybe 6 to 8. And then work up to my top set, take it for as many as I can, and then one back off. So a little bit lower volume and approaching that top set, really getting a feel for what we call feeder sets. And those feeder sets are designed to basically prime you or get you ready for their heavier set. You want to take just enough that you're ready, but not overly fatigued. I've hit, 7, 7 1/4 for unbroken sets of 30-ish. So for me to take that for 6 to 8 before I work into 8, 8 1/4 is, just enough to basically get me warm. The other interesting thing to note here is how much one plate can make a difference on one machine versus another, just based on the strength curve of the machine. So for me, the difference of a plate on this machine actually kind of feels like a lot versus a plate on something like a linear press. For me, it doesn't feel quite as dramatic. So I think it's worth noting for people too, just making sure you're smart with your warm-ups and making sure that you are keeping the wall to goal. My goal for today with this is to get a little bit of pre-fatigue, some sets that are work sets, but a couple in the tank, really warming up before I go to that top set with intensification technique. I am really feeling the fatigue today. I'm dropping one of my warm-up sets and just gonna go right into what I think is probably gonna be my first set of the pyramid. Just trying to save time and energy and keep things moving because I've still got a lot of volume after this. We've been here a minute. Wow, I feel really weak today. That's okay. We're gonna roll with it. I just get on these sets when I'm tired. I can't afford the distraction. It takes all of my mental energy just to show up for the set. So any distraction, I can't. I've had a hard time staying hydrated this week, which is, I think, important, especially for leg training. Again, it's a question of what can you do to get better and move the needle forward without being negligent. But that said, I'm gonna throw on, I was debating putting on either a quarter or a plate because my next set's gonna be an intensifier. I'm gonna go for a plate. Similar to the leg extension, more flat on a drop set. I'm setting up my weights for what I expect as the drops. We'll see if I stay with this or not. But just being able to plan for that a little bit, I think goes a really long way. I think one of the biggest things and the biggest mistakes people make when they're trying to plan for if they're gonna do a drop set or anything like that, is not getting their setup strategized, or they think about it way too much. But I just said, hey, I'll go up a plate and see how it feels. 1, 2, 3.
Smooth. Good. Hold position. 5. Cross. Come on, Danny. Yes. Come on.
Strip 2. No. Yeah.
Come on. Come
Danny.
on. You're flying. 7. Good.
Uh,
Good. Come on. All right. Come on, Danny. I got you. 10. One more. Deep breath.
Help.
Come on, Danny. 3. Come on. You got it. Good, Danny. Yep. Come on. Good. Good. 13. Good.
One other thing that I just remembered, I've had basically 0 carbs for 3 days, so it's no wonder my energy is a little bit low today. The fact that I'm eating a pump is good, so I'll take that. All right, guys. So I've still got quite a bit of volume left to do. I'm going to do the pendulum as a top set, and then probably back off with a pause, and then some hip thrusts and some occlusion work. There's purpose to that structure. There's intent to it. I like to hit a stretch movement after pressing, again, just to drive length through the quads. But I really want to make sure that any questions that you have, anything that, I talked a lot about hip mobility today, sit mobility, how to structure your session, different ways that you kind of target your quads with little nuances and tricks between sets. Any questions you have, drop them below. Remember, you can like, subscribe, comment, share, all of that. We love that. We want to make sure that we're getting information out to you. We want to be here as a resource for you. So if you have questions, drop them. Otherwise, I'll see you at the Olympia.